welcome to a very special episode of Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. Because today I want to talk about one of the main reasons why I started this podcast in the first place. And that was to create a space for discussion around mental health and some of the most prevalent challenges it comes to talking about your mental health, your vulnerabilities, your weaknesses, those things that are seen as they're treated as incompetencies if you can't live up to certain expectations, certain standards that are set by society and by workplace culture. Today, I'm joined by Paul Simard, best known for his TEDx talk, The Mythical Man. And how do we overcome these societal expectations when it comes to men's mental health? How do we come over the most prevalent challenges when it comes to what men have to face in today's society? If any of the issues in this episode resonate with you and you want to dive deeper on them, you can reach out to me at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com or shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie, or even on Instagram at eugene.leeway. Just send me a DM, send me a voice note, and we can take this conversation further. So I really hope you enjoyed today's episode with Paul Simard. Paul, welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway, and thank you again for taking time to join the show.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today.
Paul, I'm going to go straight into this. I'm going to dive deep into men's mental health because I know you are this is your area of expertise. So one thing with Give Yourself Some Leeway, it's always been about opening the discussion around men's mental health and being open to those weaknesses, those vulnerabilities that we tend to hide from society, from our family, from our friends, from our work colleagues, because we're afraid of how we'll be judged, how we'll be treated as being incompetent in our role if we can't meet the demands, if we feel that the workload is too much, if we admit to being stressed, overwhelmed, or burnt out. So what do you think are some of the most prevalent challenges when it comes to men's mental health in today's society?
Yeah, thank you. You're not joking. We're getting right into it. I actually believe that the first and most important place to start is with our own narrative, which is the birthplace of all of those fears, right? The idea that someone's going to judge us, the idea that someone's going to put us on in some kind of a box, that they're going to label us in some way. That is a spell of sorts that has been cast by society that we have internalized. And so when you really, and I'm not talking about situations of bullying here or those kinds of things, right? But for the most part, when we are fearful of those things and we reflect on our experiences, 90% of the time, in my own experience, all of the judgment and things like that has only ever been in my head. In very few moments and instances have I ever actually experienced someone overtly judging me for the way that I've shown up. And so my fears were misplaced, but that's because there is a narrative in society that that is what will happen. It starts in Hollywood, it starts in our and goes on into our sports arenas, all of these places where these notions of the tough stoic who can take anything on, who keeps it all in, who blows through the pain. These are the portraits of the hero that are put upon us. And in those situations, how does the hero overcome? Well, he is judged or criticized or challenged by someone and has to rise up against that thing. And so that person who is creating the challenge is society. And we are the individual who needs to rise above. And so we create that same story and narrative for ourselves in our human experience. And so it's really important to be able to disassociate, I think, our lived experience from our projected experience, the experience that we're projecting out into the world. And that is not easy because it is so hardwired. Actually, you didn't know this, but today is actually my 52nd birthday. So I've been on this planet for 52 years. I got 52 years of programming in my brain going on, right? I'm not going to rewire my brain after 52 years upon bringing an awareness for the first time to that. It is going to take time. It is going to require patience and grace and support from others who can help me to continually lean in to the new narrative about who I am and what I'm worth and how I'm showing up in the world, right? So these things take time. And that's why I think it's also important that we don't try to do these things alone. And that's the second narrative that we need to break down, which is to say that we need to do it on our own. No man is an island sounds very trite and cute as a saying, but it is in fact cute and trite as a saying because it is also true. It's a stereotype because it's true. We actually can't do most things on our own. Even the things that we think we're doing on our own, we're not doing on our own because somebody created the tool. Somebody, plowed the land before, or somebody, all of these other things, we're not actually doing them on our own. And so the notion of doing this kind of work and having these explorations in community and creating spaces for men and sometimes men and women to go through and retell and recreate and rewrite these stories is also profoundly important. We we are going to have moments of slip. It will not. It's not a linear growth trend. When we start to move up, we inevitably will take a slip back. And it's in those moments that having people around us who can support us and who can guide us and reflect back to us what they are experiencing in us in a healthy way that can allow us to continue on these things. So, largely, the biggest piece that needs to be addressed is stories, right? And I believe, I don't know how many, most of your listeners will probably have a notion of the archetypes, right? So, in the standard four are king, warrior, magician, lover. And I think we're seeing a lot of energy right now around the reclamation of the king archetype, like men need to become kings again. I actually disagree. And I believe that the archetype that actually needs to be reclaimed in this time is the magician. Because everything from capitalism to racism to misogyny to you name it, these are all stories. Capitalism is a story. Racism is a story. They are spells that have been cast upon us. And so I believe if we truly want to help create the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, as Charles Eisenstein says, then it is the time for the magician, the healthy magician, to take his place, to reclaim his place in the archetypes so that we can actually start to tell a better story and help cast spells that will serve and support my children, grandchildren, and so on.
And when it comes to that, try and, let's say, create those narratives or create those stories, these spells as a magician.
Mhm.
What's the best way for, if someone feels that they're in this situation where they want to recreate this narrative? What's the best approach for them to take to, what's the best step forward they can take right now?
Yeah. So the word that I'm struggling with the most in there is best, right? Because there is no best. Best implies singular. Best implies tried and true and proven, and in these kinds of things, as you would know as well as anyone, there is going to be no solution along those paths because every one of our experiences is different. Every one of our what we are trying to accomplish is different, and how we are empowered, the skills that we have are different. So there is no best way. And so I personally believe that the best way, in fact, is to start looking for men around you that you feel represent something that is closer to that which you seek to embody. To go seeking elders in your community. Elders used to be a natural phenomenon in communities and villages, right? And it had nothing to do with age, but it had to do with how that person was showing up in the world around that particular thing. And so if you're looking to create a new story around how you show up as a partner, well, look for somebody who you believe has a strong partnership, and just be curious with them, explore with them. How did they come to be that way? How is it they show up? What are their reflections? on the key ways to communication or intimacy and all of these things. Seek out elders, and elders are not all, they don't know everything. So someone might be an elder as it relates to relationship, and another one might be an elder as it relates to fathering. Another might be an elder as it relates to other things. And so it's to first start looking for the models that are more aligned with where you are hoping to get to in this next moment, right? So I think that that is a great first step that we should all be able to do. And if you can't do that, or if you look around and you don't have anyone, we'll try starting to look for influencers who are online. Right now, there are many, many men's wellness influencers who can be found online in all nature of field, right? Again, relationship, sexuality, whatever the issue may be, and just start to pay more attention to them as opposed to the cat video or the guy smashing into the telephone pole, the funny stuff, right? Like, think about how we're using our free time, and can you use that more constructively to get a better way of showing up in the world?
I think that leans a lot more into leadership and as you said, the what influences us. And what I found a lot is when people are looking for leaders, um, I think a lot of people lean into outdated concepts of what it means to be a leader. And they see a
Mm.
lot of, let's say, all this red pill kind of ideologies and being like, oh, you're not good enough. You need to be getting the fancy cars, you need to be getting all this, and that to be living your best life. And that's what people are looking towards as the, let's say, expectations of them. That, okay,
Mhm.
that's the lifestyle I need to live to be successful, to be an influence, to be a leader, to be looked up to in this society.
Yeah. Yeah. So absolutely. And so what that is, and I'm not one for qualifiers, but if I was going to qualify that kind of, first of all, I would say that that's not leadership, right? I would say absolutely that that's not leadership, because leadership is not extractive fundamentally. And what I mean by extractive is that it takes more than it gives. And those kinds of metrics that you've just outlined in terms of success, right? Quote unquote success, they require more taking than they do giving. Even if you're talking about the world's greatest life coach, there's more taking than there is giving, because that person is probably earning their needs, well beyond their needs, extravagance at the expense of the people who are potentially stretching themselves thin to invest in these people who are right. So there's an extractive element there. True leadership is nourishing. True leadership is like the wolf, which is leading from the behind, right? Leading from the rear of the pack, making sure that those that go before are safe, that they stay on the track, that they stay on path. That's leadership. That's not extractive. The way the wolf leads the pack from the rear is in support of the greater community. He's the benefit for the wolf to protect the pack is for the pack's benefit, not for his own, right? At the end of the day. And so my metric for who I engage with, and I'm sure there are people in my IG feed that I'm following that I probably don't really want to follow, but they're also probably way down in my algorithm by this point in time. But how much of their feed looks like it's gone through Photoshop, right? So it's hyper polished, it's all love and light, it's all perfection. There's no rawness, there's no human element, there's no human energy to it. I'm looking for the rough edges in leadership, because leadership is hard. And when it looks too polished, when it looks too clean, I start to get a little worried. And that's not to say that they can't be. I just wonder how applicable it is to the rest of us.
Yeah, I feel that the they make this, let's say, alpha male kind of image, but they do it from a perspective of I'm up here
Mhm.
and I'm your leader, I'm up here. And there's the disconnect then because, yes, people are in their, let's say, circle of influence. Then they're like, oh, wow, he's the leader. I look up to him. But they, more often than not, they look up with the kind of the mindset, oh, I could never reach that level.
Mhm.
And while they aspire to try and reach that level, it's so photoshopped and so polished and so beyond their current, let's say, limiting beliefs. They're like, there's no way I could reach that level. So I'm going to aspire to be like this very photoshopped character and look up to him in the hopes of one day achieving that. Whereas I find that's very unrealistic and it can be demoralizing.
I think especially in these cases where we're talking about men's work specifically, my question, which is another sort of metric as to whether or not um, I feel like this is a community worth engaging with, is what happens to this organization tomorrow if the person who's currently the figurehead walks away? Does it survive? Will it go on? If it will, there's community there. They're building something of value, even though there's a figurehead. There's nothing wrong with a figurehead. Absolutely nothing wrong with it at all. But if it is that sole thing that keeps the whole organization together, and there are plenty like this, then we need to wonder and we need to be concerned. I believe, in my experience, because it is another kind of, you're almost creating a false god, right? And a false, like you said, it's a false set of expectations. You're creating the aspirational energy, which is what will keep people in the community because they feel as if the only way they're ever going to get to be that person is if they stay in. And so, you know what? I really can't afford the next level program, but I'm going to do it because it's going to get me one step closer to where he is. And then they do that for 6 months, and they've got a little bit more capacity, and they see an opportunity to go up to the next level, and they go. What they what they often, and I did this actually, what I didn't take the time to stop and look at was I actually gaining net? And the answer was no, because anytime I had a little bit more capacity, anytime I had a little bit more growth, I was expending it. In other words, they were extracting it from me to get to the next level. So I was never actually moving ahead, but they were making more money off of me every time I signed up for a new course. And again, that's very, very cynical. But and most, I don't know about most. Many organizations are not like that. But do we take the time to reflect, to stop, and to wonder about how these organizations are built and what it is they're actually promoting? Are they promoting the work or are they promoting a brand? Are they promoting community or are they promoting events? There's a big difference there, right? And we don't always take the time to use our discernment to wonder about that. And I would invite more men to do that, to take the time to be very, very discerning, to listen to your body and your heart as you're exploring these opportunities before jumping into something that may end up feeling great in the moment, but not carrying anything out beyond the experience itself.
Yeah, that was kind of going to be my next question was about how is there any holistic or let's say emotionally intelligent approach that you would take in terms of trying to understand what would you look for in a leader if you're looking for that circle of influence to take you to that next level. Of course, you don't want to be looking for the materialistic traits of a leader. You want to know where that leader is coming from, where's that going to value in terms of community, in terms of your own self-awareness, your own authenticity.
Yeah.
And is there anything else that you would add to that in terms of maybe a holistic approach or um being more emotionally intelligent with your circle of influence?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very challenging question. And for me, I think what came up as you were speaking to that and framing that question was the notion of really paying attention to the language that the person uses, right? So in men's work, we encourage the speaking from the I perspective, the owning of the experience, which is great. It's very, very powerful. Um, and when it comes to the leader, is their use of the word I done in promotion, or is it done in partnership? Is it done in brothership? Or am I trying to create synergy and connection with you by my use of the word I, or am I aggrandizing myself, right? Am I bragging? I think that's one of the key pieces, right? I would also really, and this is more of my personal experience than it is any kind of generalization, but if you come across somebody who is go, go, go all the time, who wants you to become unstoppable, who wants, unlimited growth, all of those things, take a moment and listen to yourself. Those things all sound really, really wonderful because they've got great marketing campaigns behind them. But personally, when I started to really listen to that kind of energy, it made me realize how exhausting all of that is and how it's a large part of why we are in the position we are today. I'm much more interested today in developing the skill of becoming stoppable. I want to be able to have my daughter say something to me and for me to go, okay, the thing I'm doing right now is getting set aside so that I can fully be present and hear what my daughter is saying. I'm going to put this piece of work aside so I can fully listen and be present to what the Black community is saying, to what Indigenous communities are saying here in North America, to what climate the climate is saying, right? Like, what is Mother Nature trying to tell us? You're over in Europe. I'm here in Canada. Canada is quite literally on fire right now. We have forest fires like we've never seen from Quebec out to BC, the entire country. Very few provinces don't have forest fires going on right now. What are we missing? You know, we just went through 3 years of a pandemic. Did we miss any messages? Are we allowing ourselves to become stoppable in this moment, to hear what COVID might have been trying to tell us, other than our science rocks, bring on the vaccine? And for anybody who doesn't quite catch it, there's some truth in that, but there's some sarcasm there too, right? We were so heavily reliant on the science, we forgot the role that we might play as a part of nature in navigating those moments because we didn't take the time to stop. We did for a bit, right? The dolphins in Vienna, here in Quebec, we saw the whales coming back up the rivers and things like up rivers makes it sound like fresh water. They're not. They're massive, like sea gulfs, right? So for a very brief moment, we were stopping and we were like, "Whoa, like this is a glimpse of what could be." But then it got swept over again by the unstoppableness, by the desire to beat COVID, to defeat the pandemic. And I understand the energetics behind it. And again, what messages did we miss because we didn't take the time to slow down and to listen to what COVID was telling us about our baseline health, about the way we're living, about the way we're educating, about the way we're treating our people in our hospitals and our medical institutions, and whether or not we should even be treating them, or whether we should actually be thinking of preventive medicine as a starting point. A lot of things happened in that moment, and I'm not sure we really picked up on a lot of the messages that we could have had. The thing, right? The leadership in those times didn't take the time to stop. They were so interested in progress and growth and go, go, go. We need to keep progressing and going forward, right? They didn't take the time to invite us to stop as a collective, right? So if your coach, mental health, professional, if your therapist, if whoever you're leaning on to become a leader isn't also inviting through an opportunity for you to slow down, to take a breath, to listen, to share in a breath, to listen, to be with ourselves, to hear what we might be missing, then I would invite you to consider looking for somebody who does take the time to do those things.
I love that because with Give Yourself Some Leeway, I've always said that if you ever feel overwhelmed or stressed, just take a step back, take a deep breath, or as you like to say just there, I think it's very beautiful, share in a breath.
Yeah.
There's just that connectivity. It's that engagement that people are missing out on.
Yes.
It's take a step back and share that breath with someone,
Mm.
experience that moment with someone, and
Yeah.
just give yourself that room, give yourself that space to understand and be present with everything around you,
Yeah.
and recenter yourself, ground yourself, and
Yeah.
then reconnect with the world around you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's beautiful. Beautifully said. There's a saying when it comes to relationships that from a man's perspective, if you were to ask women, what do you prefer, performance or presence? And very few women are going to say performance. What they're looking for from their partners is presence. And that's what the world is looking for us from right now. That's what's being called through is let's be present in the current moment. Let's not bypass this moment. Let's demonstrate leadership by being fully present with the moment.
And for men to become more present in the moment, to be more present with themselves, become more aware of themselves.
Mm.
I'm not going to say the best way, but what's the most practical
Yeah.
step forward that they could take today if they want to become more in tune or more aware of themselves? Take that first step forward to being more present.
Yeah. Thank you. So again, there's a whole suite of things that we could talk about here, right? Everything from meditation to journaling to more time in nature to you name it, right? We could go on and on and on. One of the simplest things, and this is a tool, and we talked about it again, we've mentioned it a couple of times in this conversation, right? So there's the notion of sharing breath, and the sharing piece makes it seem as if you need to be in, proximity to someone to share the breath. The sharing of the breath is not the sharing of the breath with someone necessarily. That actually requires a whole other level of intimacy if you're going to share the same breath, um, which is fine if your partner's around and you want to do that, then off you go. Um,
Or
but the
CPR, but
or CPR, or the share. But in this particular moment, the sharing of the breath is the sharing of the breath with the world and the space in which you are in. Now, I've been in moments where I've had men who are in distress, we'll call it, on the other end of the call, on the end of a video conference or whatever the case may be. And one of the first things that I do is I invite them to share in 7 intentional breaths. And there's a number of reasons why we do that. One is the effect on the nervous system and just helping people to drop in and things like that. But the other piece is to recognize that of the 3 point whatever billion men who are on the planet today, you did something that most of them did not. You've accomplished something that most of them couldn't even create the space to think about, which is to say, you took 7 intentional breaths. You gave 7 gifts to yourself because an intentional breath and an unintentional breath affect the body in very different ways. Again, the nervous system being one of them, oxygen to the brain and the heart and the lung and all of the different organs. An intentional breath is far more cathartic than people realize, right? And so you've done something, you've dropped into your body with a level of awareness through those 7 breaths and a level of nourishment that I'd venture to guess 98.5% of men didn't even think to give themselves that day, right? So that's a win. That's a and you start to feel the empowerment that comes through that. You start to feel the centeredness. It doesn't take long for you through the breath to start to really experience what's happening in your body, right? Another simple thing to do, and you can do this even while you're working, right? Not while you're working, but while you're at your desk, let's call it, is to just for a moment, turn the screen off, You don't even have to shut down or anything. Just hit the power button if you're on a PC, or put it in sleep if you're on a laptop, and just take a moment and put your hands on your lap, right? And just very slowly, just sort of move your hands from your knee to the hip on the outside of the leg, and just lean into that sensation. And if that feels weird, then you can do it on your arms, you can do it on your chest, but just start to experience what it feels like to be in contact with your own body, physically, literally. It is really interesting to note the sensations that come through on your body. And 15, 30 seconds. You don't have to do these things for a long time. So the bar is set very low. The level of investment at the early stages is very, very simple, right? We're not asking people to turn their whole life upside down. What ended up happening for me over time is I decided that one of the best things that I could do was wake up at 5 a.m. Not because there's a book written on the 5 a.m. routine or any of those things, but simply because it was the quietest time of the day in my home. I've got three, and at the time they were younger, three young daughters. They're older now. But between 5 and 6:30 a.m. was really going to be the quietest time of the day, where I could really be sure that I was going to have some time for myself. And the routine was more or less the same every day. There was some variance in it, and I played with some things as well, right? Like I didn't create a 90-minute routine and commit to that for the rest of my life. Things have come in and gone out, because things have meant more to me at certain points than they have in others. Yoga was very meaningful to me a few years ago, especially during the pandemic. Much less so today. I'm into other things. I've moved past my interest in yoga, which is fine. And so it's about gradually over time allowing yourself to be curious and explore what feels good for you, but doing some of those simple things we talked about. Like I said, you can, if you're not into journaling, that's fine. No worries. I get it. I'm not a huge journaler myself. One of the things you can do, just in terms of um, getting in touch with how you're feeling and tapping into your awareness, is take a moment, beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day. It's not journaling. Take 3 sentences. What are 3 sensations that you can feel in your body right now? Oh, my neck is feeling a little sore. You know, that's all. Feels like there's a tightness in my shoulders. That's all. 3 things like that. Oh, I notice my legs are tense, and I'm bouncing on my on the balls of my feet. You know, simple things like that, and then you're done, right? You don't have to go any further than that. These are all easy ways of becoming more attuned to what's happening in our body and being more aware of our experiences during the day.
I think one thing I want to cover before we finish up is we talk a lot about our healing process,
Mm.
especially when it comes to our mental health, when it comes to our physical health, when we're dealing with past traumas, past experiences. We always talk about how we heal ourselves, but you have this concept as well known as holding. So what's the difference between healing yourself and holding?
Yes, thank you. So etymologically, actually, the word heal comes from the word whole. So healing etymologically means to make whole. So first and foremost, it's more or less the same thing. But again, back to the energetics behind the words, that's where the magic lies, and potentially not so great magic in the case of healing, in my experience. Because the truth of the matter is my life, like most other people's lives, have been a series of traumas at various levels, or things that we are currently today calling traumas, right? Everything from bullying to scary moments in my life when I ran into a 10-foot snake and I was like freaked out, like all these different things, right? And none of them are massive. So I will start by saying that I have not been in a war zone. I've never been forced to flee my home because of, terrorists or anything along those lines. So just to be clear, because it's important to note the difference here without getting too much in the detail. But even in my own experiences, I've been on this healing journey for most of my life. In my 20s, was introduced to self-help books, and here I am, 25 plus years later, and I'm still doing the work, as we'll call it. And I would say that it's only been in the last 6 months that I've started to feel a little bit of ease around this whole journey, because I've moved away from trying to heal, which requires some sort of destination to be attained, right? When you've got a cut on your hand, as long as that cut is still visible, you'll say that you're healing well, but you're not healed. Well, the challenge with so much of these things, and because we're humans and because there is so much in our experience that is wounding, um, and we can go from the mother wound to the father wound to the intergenerational trauma wound to the friend wound. Like, the number of wounds and traumas that we can address is quite literally endless. um, that the healing becomes like the horizon, right? We think we're getting closer, but it keeps getting farther away. Or the distance actually never closes, is the truth, right? It's always that same distance away. And when I started to lean into some of my experiences, and it was really my coach and therapist who helped me come to this space of wholing. He uses words which I think are more generalized, called post-traumatic growth. And for me, post-traumatic growth still has that trauma in it. So I wanted to disassociate from having that trauma be a resonance in my experience. I moved that into wholing as an acceptance of that thing that happened to me that helped to create me. I'm not having this conversation with you today if it isn't for the collection of experiences that I had over the past several decades. I'm just not. We're not. And if we are, it's not in the same vein. It's not in the same, like, this conversation today is an exact result of all of those experiences. And I am extremely grateful for those experiences and for this conversation, even more so, right? And the only way I get to that point, and that I don't wait longer before leaning in, is if I'm waiting to be healed before I have the conversations. But if I can accept the whole experience of who I am, here we are having this conversation. It also allows me, when I take a quote unquote step back, to start with grace and graciousness towards myself. It's okay. It's not that I'm not healed when I thought I was. It's that I'm whole and this is a part of me, right? It's also, though, not an invitation for me to go and engage in reckless or hurting behavior because I'm wholing and not healing. That's not wholing. That's creating more trauma and more wounding in myself. Hurt people hurt people. And when hurt people, they hurt themselves again. Right? So I have no interest in that. That's not a wholing experience. And so, with myself and with others that I've shared this with, there's been a deep sense of relief of not having to heal all the things that they're feeling through the course of their lives and past lives, through intergenerational trauma and the like, and to just being able to be fully present with themselves, and to truly learn to be able to lean into loving themselves, because they're whole. They are already whole. You don't need to do anything. You're whole. Accept it, love it, nourish it, and if you can, those experiences that we would call trauma or wounding or whatever, try and see if you can't somehow use those in service to yourself and community, family, whoever, so that somebody else doesn't have to experience what you did potentially.
I love that because it actually reminds me a lot of my own core philosophy of self awareness, self compassion, and self care. You have to be
Mm-hmm.
aware of yourself, be aware of your shortcomings, being aware of where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. And once you're aware of them, you have to treat yourself with kindness and compassion. Acknowledge yourself for for your failures, for your successes, for your wins. For the
Yeah.
it's often we don't acknowledge our wins and we dwell a lot on our weaknesses.
Yeah.
And it's only once you acknowledge them, then you have to see what's serving me and what's not serving me. Because a lot of the
Exactly.
time, instead of letting, as you said, letting those experiences that hurt you, and rather than leaning into those, being like, well, they've hurt me and this is the way it's always been, and I might as well continue down this path. It's like, well, it's not serving me, and it's not helping me show up as my best self so that I can serve others.
Yeah.
So it gives you that perspective to become more aware of yourself. What's serving you, what's not serving you. How can you lean in on either of those? Lean in or lean out. And then how do you show up and take care of yourself so that you can show up and take care of others?
Right. 100%. It's perfectly encapsulated.
So Paul, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do so? The best way.
The best way. Well, the best does work there, but it's also up to them because some people like email, some people like I do have my website and my email is there, as is my mobile number. And anybody who's international, you can find me on WhatsApp. Um, but the website is humanity, humenity.co.com. On Instagram, I'm living__wisdom. But I think you can find me if you just search for Paul Simard. And Paul Simard on Facebook. Look for my personal account, not the business one. We don't use that one anymore.
Nice. I'll stick them all in the show notes anyway. So
Great.
if anyone's looking for them, I'll be in the show notes. Awesome, Paul. Again, it was great having you on. Happy birthday and enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers. Thanks so much. It was a pleasure to be here.